family that were robustly pro-war and criticizing people like John Kerry, who'd actually served but become critics. And so I thought this was very interesting, and I began to try to understand how it was possible for him to just leave the military like that and not get in trouble. I examined the gap between his commanding officers who said he had simply vanished and these records that were produced, pay records that suggested that he had served. And it became very clear to me that some sort of high-level cover-up had gone on in 1973. Well, I then wondered what his father's position was on this. In 1973, his father was the chairman of the Republican National Committee for Richard Nixon. And I thought, well, surely the father at least would have known whether his son was doing military service or not, or would have at least asked him. And so I became more interested in the father. And the more I looked at the father, I had the same question: who was this man, and how had he become president of the United States? And again, I discovered all these staggering things that I didn't know, that aren't in any books. They completely changed my understanding of the father. And as I began exploring, it started changing my understanding of not just their two presidencies and their two lives, but the presidencies of many others: Eisenhower, Truman, Kennedy, Nixon, Carter. And I began to see that there were events going on shaping these presidencies that had simply been missed entirely.
But compared to the others, the Bush father and son seem to be in the most blank pages. I mean, we do know about Truman's life or Eisenhower. There's a history to these people that doesn't seem to exist for the Bush.
Well, you see, the reason is that what the Bushes and their circle were doing is that they were influencing all these other presidencies. And what I lay out in Family of Secrets is this unknown American history. For example, the banking firm that the Bushes were key players in, Brown Brothers Harriman, their partners were top advisors to every president of the United States, irrespective of party. Now, that's very interesting. And so you see Robert Lovett, a partner in Brown Brothers Harriman, and he's an advisor to Truman. Harriman, a partner and advisor to FDR, or serving in positions in the administration. You see Robert Lovett being the architect of the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency. The Central Intelligence Agency was basically cooked up by these Wall Street elites. They had the idea to put this thing together. This was not the idea of Harry Truman. Basically, it was foisted upon Harry Truman, who was reticent, and years later actually wrote something in public which is not well known, where he said, I never expected this agency to end up doing, I think he used the term shenanigans, the kind of things they did, because he had been told, he'd been sold a bill of goods. He was told, we need a peacetime intelligence agency. We don't have one. And this will gather information for you so that you can make better decisions. Well, that was never the intent. The intent was always to do these covert operations, to go in abroad and to intercede in any country where financial interests were being threatened. And of course, the United States had always done that. It always had gone into Latin America, removing and putting in leaders who served the interests of, all the companies, United Fruit and on, International Telephone and Telegraph, in Chile, Guatemala, all of these countries, Honduras and so forth. And so they basically just legalized this. They created this within the U.S. government, and this was the Bush family outfit doing this. And so we go forward and we start seeing the influence of Dwight Eisenhower, where it is a group again involving Prescott Bush, George W. Bush's grandfather, who basically choose Dwight Eisenhower to be president. And well, because Dwight Eisenhower was a non-political guy. He was a general. He was, both political parties were interested in him because he was a star. But he was not political, and he wasn't right-wing or anything like that. He wasn't particularly Republican, but they successfully convinced him to run for president. And he, of course, he knew nothing about what to do in the White House, and he was rather disengaged. So he was usually out golfing with Prescott Bush. That was his golfing partner. That's who was, talking in his ear. You see, we've missed all of this stuff. We focus so much on the presidents as being singular actors upon the stage of history. We don't understand that they're not. That they're individuals like you or me who, through some complex means, are propelled into this position under tremendous pressure from interests that we don't see because they don't want to be seen. To shape them, help them on their way up. And I would apply this to Barack Obama as well. We don't know what makes them do what they do. And we don't study that. Journalism does a very poor job. And I have to say, most of the major books by the famous historians do a terrible job of this because they're not sufficiently forensic. They don't really dig. And it's hard work, I might add. I spent 5 years on Family of Secrets. And in the end, I produced more than 1,000 footnotes in there to back up all of these revelations.
I sometimes think a president comes to work on his, or her, maybe later, first day, and somebody comes and says, now let me explain to you what you may and may not do.
Well, think about it. I mean, somebody is a Wall Street person, or Howard Dean, who was a doctor, and then he was in politics. George W. Bush, what did he do? I mean, he had a superficial role with a baseball team, and then suddenly he was governor of Texas. I mean, most of these people, in Europe, typically people come up through the civil service, and they know the ins and outs of government. American leaders don't know much about how things really work, and they find out the hard way on day one of the job.
Now you are looking at the powers behind the scenes, and corporations get a little bit of public attention, and maybe the military-industrial complex and money. But from what I understand about your book, you're up to a very curious power behind the scenes, sort of the intersection of intelligence and money, and I have never seen it quite so closely intertwined.
Yeah. Well, you see, when I began noticing these things, like this group of bankers who had created the CIA, when I discovered that they were directly connected to the Bush family, when I discovered 3 generations of Bushes all involved in intelligence activity, even the grandfather, Prescott Bush, as I describe in Family of Secrets, a source describes him arriving in Hong Kong he's a U.S. senator now in the 1950s, Eisenhower's pal, and he comes there and he wants to know what happened, what went wrong with an effort to assassinate Zhou Enlai, the Chinese leader. They had decided to kill him, and it had gone awry. They were supposed to poison his rice bowl. And so he was there to find out what had gone wrong. So this is the grandfather, the father, the son. All of them went to Yale. All of them were members of the secret society, Skull and Bones. All of them received campaign contributions from the same people. And so there is this continuity. And then you see them and their business partners influencing all these presidencies. But it really